Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here. This is week 14, and that's chapter 13 in contemporary history. So we're almost at the end of the semester. And if I forget, I appreciate your patience with me this semester. I had some personal setbacks and was late on a lot of things and adopted a new book. So I think we could have done a better job. I could have done a better job putting the course together. But hopefully we've learned something. And the one thing I've learned I want to talk about as it applies to chapter 13. So first of all, you have no assignment this week, so hopefully you'll do the reading anyway. I'd appreciate it if you would, or skim through it, or at least go through my notes, or hold on for the lecture, and I'll try to keep it somewhat short. I'm turning my timer on here. There we go. So this chapter is about emerging Africa, and I think for those of us in the Western world, and especially in the U.S. at a U.S. university studying contemporary world history, we probably don't pay enough attention to Africa, but I think, one of the reasons for that is the historical depth, political history and history of wars and histories of empires focused on capitalism sort of take the center stage in, U.S. history books. And so, the African continent, African development sort of gets the short shrift sometimes, if you will. But I found this chapter to be really well written by our author. There's some parts I think he struggles with, and I'll talk about those. But basically what he's talking about is what's going on in Africa after World War I and after World War II. So he's kind of catching up with where we've been with China and Europe. And it really the one thing I've learned when I read this chapter was how similar every place in the world is. You may find that an industrial revolution is 50 years off here, or 80 years off there, or feminism comes much later. You may find that, but at the same time, it seems like in every one of these societies, and in this case, continents that we've talked about, the development is sort of the same. And what I mean by that is, you go through this era of colonial rule, and then nationalism, and then striving for independence. It's sort of the same story we hear again and again. And then typically, once countries get independence, that collapses upon itself, and the cycle starts all over again. And it's really no different in Africa. But the first thing to check out is this word uhuru, which is freedom in Swahili, and it's this long dream of African communities for independence. And it's understandable because, as you know from our readings in the past, when we were reading about colonialism, Africa was the place where, France and Belgium and England and the U.S. And Germany and a number of other countries colonized parts of Africa and really took advantage. So what the chapter is opening with is this idea of freedom and this idea of sort of breaking away from colonial rule. And I think it's interesting because the chapter talks about the benefits of colonial rule, which are mainly technological, like in African areas or African countries that were colonized, they may have a transportation system and a communication system that is more advanced because the colonists left it there. So there's that part, and there's also medical care was a huge benefit. The Western influence of colonial nations left better medical care than Africa had seen before in some areas, and same with education. So there certainly were some benefits left behind by colonialism, but I think they're greatly outweighed by the negatives. And the negatives, of course, not only are the abuse of all the native people, the stealing of their land, the ruining of their resources, and this whole notion of apartheid, which you may have heard of before, but when colonized areas of Africa get a little bit more advanced, now apartheid comes along, which is legal segregation, which basically means is that blacks don't have the right to vote, and they don't have the right to get an education, and they don't have the right to full citizenship. So we've been through that road before, regardless of what you're studying, whether it's the U.S. Civil War or what has happened in Africa. But when you go through that first section, it just talks about the benefits and the downside of colonization in Africa. and leads up to this period of time in the 50s and 60s where almost all of the major countries in the continent of Africa go independent. And then the book talks about, and I think the book is implying, should there be some sort of united Africa with all these countries? And I have a little bit of a problem with that because I think the book is trying to force Africa into a certain Western model that it doesn't fit. But and one of the reasons for that is, as you read through, Africa is huge. First of all, it's enormous, and the diversity there is incredible. I mean, even when you get to the end of this chapter and you read about the African culture, you'll read that there were like 800 religions in Africa at one time, and they all got along and they were all advanced and developed. So that alone tells you the diversity. I mean, I don't know. I've heard like 8,000 languages, and so when countries are trying to come together, or when someone's trying to colonize a group, it's really difficult when the people are so diverse and so spread out that they don't have any sense of nationalism or community, if you will. So I think that's interesting in the book. And so when you read about the era of independence, it talks about how all of these countries went independent, but at the same time, the issues that they had, most of them related to this diversity that I just mentioned. So there's that. And then you'll read about Nigeria and oil reserves, and that's a mess. And you'll read about Central Africa and, Boko Haram. You'll read about, and the Tutsis and the Hulu. Maybe you've heard about these groups in the news. This stuff's still going on, but it's really talking about, especially with the Tutsis, it's really talking about Central Africa and what's going on there right now. So there's a lot of this stuff that's still current, and that's why I like this book, because it's really up to date. So check that out, Era of Independence. And then finally, the end of the book, and or the end of the chapter, it's a really short chapter, talks about change in African societies. And I think, again, this idea that I started with, where there's a lot of parallels in all of these histories, certainly the impact of modernization or modernity or westernization, if whatever you want to call it, has been unequally distributed in Africa. So the urban people, of course, have had more opportunities for education and more opportunities for growth and economic growth, and the rural communities not so much. But you've seen that in this country, you've seen that in China. If you go back in history, I mean, this is sort of the process for some of these third world areas that are being exposed to Western or modern civilization for the first time. So there's that. It's a good read, and so it talks about how education has improved, which is always good. And one of the things I got out of this was, you read through this chapter, and it talks about issues in Africa between Muslims and Christians, okay? But then it talks about, the 800 religions that had been in Africa forever, where everyone was getting along fine. So it's curious to me when these big world religions, Christianity and Islam come into areas, now all of a sudden you have these warring factions. So it really makes you think about, what's good and what isn't good about Western religion and what issues it may cause. So there's that. And as far as like treatment of women, again, it's really split between urban and rural areas. So, there are feminist movements in certain urban areas in certain countries. But again, I think we have to be careful not to generalize when we're talking about Africa, because it's just too big and too diverse. It really, truly is. So hopefully you'll read the chapter and get something out of it. Have a great week. Let me know if you need anything. Be careful, and I'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye.